Hi, and welcome to this episode of TaxSnax. My name is Rebecca Sheldon. I am a tax barrister at Old Square Tax Chambers, and I specialise in all areas of UK taxation. Today, I am going to briefly discuss the recent upper tier decision in Hyman and Pensfold and Goodfellow. These are three separate appeals on exactly the same point concerning the meaning and effect of Section 116 of FA 2003. As stated, this is going to be a brief discussion, but I did write an article on this topic last year for Tax Advisor magazine after the FTT decisions came out. So if you would like further details, you can have a look at that, or if you would like, you can contact me through Old Square Tax Chambers website. Now, the issue in this case was whether all of the land sold together with the houses was or formed part of the garden or grounds of the house, as the SDLT rate payable depended on the answer. And this is the distinction between a mixed-use property and a residential property. The taxpayers obviously wanted some of the land sold with the house not to form part of the garden and grounds because they want it to be a mixed-use property, as there are lower rates on mixed-use properties, and they had lost on this point in the FTT. Now, the only appeal ground in the upper tier was that the land can only be part of the garden or grounds of the house if the land is needed for the reasonable enjoyment of the house, having regard to the size and nature of the house. The upper tier decided, in my view, not very surprisingly, that there was no wording in Section 116 which imposes or even hints at a requirement that the land can only be a garden or grounds of a dwelling if the land is needed for the reasonable enjoyment of the dwelling. Now, the reason this judgment is important is for two reasons. So the first is that there was a really useful discussion at paragraph 42 onwards regarding the persuasiveness and usefulness of guidance. And this was in the context of it being relied on by the taxpayers in this case. Now, the judgment stated that guidance does not differ from an academic textbook, and there is no presumption that guidance is correct. And this is really important to remember, because often we do look at guidance to work out what HMRC's view might be, but occasionally we can go too far and then think that this is the correct interpretation. And actually, guidance is very frequently ignored by tribunals because it isn't binding. So that's really important to remember, and there is a useful discussion on that. And the second and certainly related important point is that the upper tier has interpreted garden grounds widely. So it hasn't imposed what I would consider to be an artificial limitation on its interpretation, limiting that to reasonable enjoyment. Now, the reason this is important to note is in the context of advertisements, which encourage claims for SDLT refunds based on the different rates of mixed use and residential properties. Now, if you are considering either making such a claim or advising on such a claim, it's really important to have a think about this critically in light of this judgment, and ideally take objective advice. So don't just take advice from the people advertising this sort of arrangement. Do take objective advice to see whether or not your prospects of success are good, particularly in cases where there is relatively low value, so the tax tribunal is going to be quite expensive comparatively. Thanks very much for your time.